The winds of the northern seas howled across the rugged landscape of Scandinavia, carrying with them the tales of a woman who would not be forgotten by history. Her name was Lagertha, a Viking warrior who stood tall against a world that believed women were meant only for the home and hearth. But Lagertha was no ordinary woman. She was a Shieldmaiden, a fighter, a leader, and a force to be reckoned with in a time when Viking society was defined by the sword and the strength of men. In a world ruled by kings and chieftains, where the power of the sword determined who would sit on the throne, Lagertha defied the odds. She didn't sit quietly in the shadows of Viking men. She stood beside them, fought alongside them, and even commanded armies when the time came. But it wasn't enough for Lagertha to simply be a warrior. Her rebellion would be against the very king who thought he could control her fate. What drove Lagertha to challenge a king? Was it ambition? Was it a thirst for power? Or was it something far deeper, a desire to define her own destiny, to carve her name into the annals of Viking history in a way no one had ever imagined for a woman? As we journey through her story, you'll discover how Lagertha's legacy wasn't just built on her sword, but on her defiance, her strength, and her unmatched courage. From the battlefield to the royal halls, Lagertha's name would be whispered in awe and fear by those who underestimated her. Stay with us as we uncover the untold saga of Lagertha, the Viking woman who led a rebellion that would change the fate of a king and the future of the Viking world. In the harsh world of the Vikings, power was seized through strength, and kings ruled with an iron fist. But Lagertha was no ordinary woman. A fierce warrior, she had proven her worth in battle, earning the respect of her people. Yet despite her prowess, she lived in a world where women were rarely seen as leaders. Her skills and bravery were overshadowed by the fact that she was a woman. King Sigvard ruled with a mix of fear and cunning, and he saw Lagertha as nothing more than a warrior, useful in battle, but not a threat to his power. His reign was about domination, and Lagertha's growing influence was something he couldn't ignore. But his arrogance clouded his judgment. He underestimated her strength and determination. Lagertha's growing discontent, Sigvard's cruelty and oppression of her people sparked a fire in Lagertha. She saw the suffering of her people under his rule and realized that true leadership wasn't just about power, it was about caring for those you led. As his abuses grew, so did Lagertha's resolve to change the system that kept her people oppressed. But it wasn't just politics. Sigvard had promised Lagertha a powerful marriage alliance, only to betray her and offer it to a rival. This betrayal ignited a fire within her, a vow to take control of her own destiny and lead her people to freedom. With her heart set on justice and her blade ready, Lagertha's rebellion was inevitable. She would challenge King Sigvard's power and change the course of Viking history. The time for words had passed. Lagertha stood on the shores of her homeland, the salty wind tugging at her cloak, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the enemy waited. Behind her stood a group of loyal warriors, their swords sharp and their hearts determined. They knew this battle wasn't just for land, it was for the very future of their people. King Sigvard had underestimated her, thinking that a woman could never challenge his authority. But Lagertha was not a woman to be silenced. She had gathered a small but fierce army of warriors, including some of her own family, who shared her vision of a new Viking future, one where strength wasn't defined by gender, but by the heart of the warrior. The first skirmish was brutal. Lagertha's forces, though outnumbered, fought with a fire that caught Sigvard's warriors off guard. The clash of steel echoed through the valley as Lagertha led her men from the front, her sword cutting through the enemy ranks with precision. Every swing was a message, not just to Sigvard, but to all who doubted her. Sigvard, ever the strategist, realized that Lagertha was no ordinary opponent. He had expected her rebellion to falter, but instead it grew stronger by the day. His forces, unprepared for the ferocity of her attack, began to lose ground. As the days passed, Lagertha's rebellion gained momentum. More warriors joined her cause, drawn not only by her skill, but by her leadership. She had proven that she was more than just a Shieldmaiden. She was a commander, a symbol of hope for those tired of Sigvard's tyranny. The final confrontation came when Lagertha led her army to Sigvard's stronghold, a fortress that had never fallen to any Viking force. With every step toward the walls, Lagertha knew that this battle would decide everything. It was not just a rebellion, it was a fight for the future of the Viking world. The battle was fierce. The air was thick with the sound of clashing weapons, the cries of warriors, and the thundering of hooves as both sides collided in a frenzy of violence. Lagertha fought with the precision and courage that had made her a legend. She was everywhere, inspiring her warriors, cutting down enemies, leading the charge. King Sigvard fought with everything he had, but he underestimated the strength of the woman who would not bow. As the dust settled and the battlefield fell silent, the truth became clear. Lagertha had emerged victorious. King Sigvard, defeated and broken, was forced to surrender to the woman he had once considered beneath him. But this wasn't just a personal victory for Lagertha. It was a victory for all who had believed in her, for every woman who had been told their place was behind a man. Lagertha had proven that power wasn't something given, it was something earned. Lagertha's rebellion had not only toppled a king but had begun to reshape the Viking world. But her journey didn't end with victory on the battlefield. The true challenge lay ahead: how to lead a people who had once rejected the very idea of a woman ruling beside them. The battle had been won, but Lagertha knew that the hardest part of her journey was only beginning. The cheers of victory echoed through the air, but they were not for long. The Viking world was not one easily changed, and the concept of a woman sitting at the throne was still a bitter pill for many to swallow. She had defeated Sigvard, but now she had to prove she was capable of ruling, not just with the strength of her sword, but with the wisdom and respect that came with leadership. Her victory was not only symbolic, it was a challenge to the entire structure of Viking society. For centuries, men had ruled, and women were rarely seen as equals. Lagertha's rise was a direct defiance of that ancient order. And although she had the loyalty of many, she also had enemies who would stop at nothing to see her dethroned. Lagertha's first challenge as a ruler was to consolidate her power. Sigvard's followers, though defeated, were not willing to let go of their former king's ideals so easily. They whispered of rebellion, of finding a new king to replace the one who had been dethroned. But Lagertha knew that to hold on to her victory, she needed not just warriors, but allies. She began to form alliances with other influential Viking leaders, some who respected her for her courage, and others who were simply eager to see a new order rise. These alliances were delicate, as many saw her as an outsider in a world of men. The battle for respect did not end with the defeat of Sigvard. While Lagertha had proven herself on the battlefield, many in Viking society still saw her as an anomaly, a woman who had dared to challenge the natural order. Her actions threatened the deeply ingrained traditions of the Viking world, where the role of women was often limited to the home and the hearth. In court, Lagertha faced skepticism and outright hostility from those who had served Sigvard and now questioned her right to rule. They could not fathom the idea of a woman leading them, and many secretly plotted against her, hoping for a male ruler to take her place. Yet, Lagertha's unwavering confidence and sharp mind began to win over some of the doubters. She showed them that her leadership was not defined by her gender, but by her actions and decisions. As Lagertha's rule continued, she began to change the Viking world in ways no one could have predicted. Under her leadership, the Vikings started to view women not just as wives or mothers, but as warriors and leaders in their own right. She promoted women to positions of power, something unheard of in Viking society, and began to reform the ways in which Viking society viewed gender roles. Her reign was marked by a series of successful campaigns, not just in battle, but in diplomacy and trade. Lagertha knew that in order for her people to thrive, she needed to expand beyond the sword and forge new paths for the future. Her legacy wasn't just built on the blood of her enemies, but on the foundation of a new order, one where both men and women could rise based on their merit, not their gender. Though Lagertha had won the battle, the true test of her reign would come in how she ruled her kingdom. Could she maintain her power in a world that wasn't ready to accept her leadership? The stage was set for Lagertha to not only rule, but to redefine the very meaning of leadership in the Viking world. After Lagertha's victory over King Sigvard, the real struggle for power began. Although she had defeated Sigvard in battle, the Vikings were not ready to accept a woman as their ruler. Many of Sigvard's former allies were angry, seeing Lagertha's rise to power as an affront to their traditions. To consolidate her position, Lagertha had to work quickly. She forged strategic alliances with powerful Viking leaders, many of whom were skeptical of a woman ruling. She proved that her leadership wasn't just based on battle prowess, but on wisdom and diplomacy. However, not everyone was on her side, and rebellion soon erupted. Sigvard's supporters saw an opportunity to reclaim power, and they quickly formed conspiracies against her rule. Despite the resistance, Lagertha responded decisively, defeating the traitors with a combination of force and political maneuvering. Her success in quelling these uprisings solidified her position, but the resistance didn't stop. Even with victories on the battlefield, many still doubted her leadership ability. In Viking culture, leadership had traditionally been a man's domain, and Lagertha had to constantly prove herself worthy of the throne. Over time, however, her reforms and leadership began to change the Viking world. Lagertha's legacy is one of strength, defiance, and transformation. As one of the few women to lead armies, she shattered Viking societal norms and proved that leadership is not defined by gender. Her rise to power demonstrated that women could rule with authority and skill, inspiring future generations to break barriers. Lagertha's military and political achievements set her apart. Lagertha's story is one of extraordinary strength, resilience, and leadership, challenging the norms of her time and leaving a lasting impact on Viking history. As a warrior, queen, and trailblazer, she proved that leadership is not bound by gender, inspiring generations of women and men alike. Through her victories on the battlefield and her diplomatic prowess, Lagertha reshaped the role of women in Viking society, demonstrating that courage and wisdom are the true measures of power.